social trust in America and trust in American institutions and trust among Americans of broadly different persuasions. If you haven't noticed, there's a something like a crisis of faith in America these days, a crisis of faith in each other, a crisis of faith in our institutions, sometimes a crisis of faith in ourselves for a lot of reasons. And there's some maybe literary ways to understand that and cultural ways to understand that, but there's also a lot of really, really good social science research on that as well. A friend of Braver Angels, Francis Fukuyama, wrote an excellent book about that a couple decades ago. And it is just fascinating to see how some of the analysis holds up nowadays. But we're going to be talking about trust and trust in institutions, trust in the American system of government in a couple broad senses. But I wanted to bring this up because obviously the 2020 elections were very polarizing. We have every reason to expect that the 2024 elections will be very polarizing. And there's just a weird way in which the matrix of kind of ground up social and sociological questions and things around just how social life works in the media age, in the social media age, in the age of digital democracy, how that has affected this. And then also how questions of the organization and the conduct and activity of our major shared institutions like media and education and government and political parties and all of them, how the situations with those have affected American democracy. And all of this obviously is of deep interest to us at Braver Angels, not necessarily out of a sense of Braver Angels explicitly working on social trust, although I think you could argue that we do in a very key way, but very specifically because the task of working to bring Americans together across the red-blue divide and across all their other divides very necessarily involves questions of social trust itself. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation. But before we actually get into the meat of it, I'd just like to introduce my boss and a great thinker and a great organizer and somebody who's been at the forefront of a lot of these issues in a lot of interesting ways over the last several decades, David Blankenhorn, the co-founder and president of Braver Angels, who has graciously agreed to sit down for this conversation and explore a lot of these questions of what trust means for America now and in the next couple of years and how we at Braver Angels can think about it for some time. So David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Luke. I'm really glad to be here. Glad to be with all of you. Looking forward to this discussion.
So let's get right into it then. David, there's obviously different ways that some people have defined social trust in academic contexts. I was wondering if you could just spend a couple minutes defining for us what how you think about it, how you think it has related to the recent social unrests and social crises of the 2000s and 2010s, and how it relates to the political polarization that we in Braver Angels have been working to address in our particular way. So if you can just give us a brief explanation of this incredibly complex social phenomenon, that would be a great way to start.
Yeah, well, it is at the very heart of our work. I think if there was only one indicator that we would want to change if we wanted less polarization, it would be more social trust. Trust, the belief that your fellow citizens are generally reliable, and the belief that the systems that operate around you are generally fair and produce outcomes that are not prejudicial against you and your group. I love collecting definitions of trust, and there's no one, but one I really like is trust is when you make yourself vulnerable to another person. I really like that. It's the idea that that you're in a relationship where you're depending on someone in a way that the other person could hurt you. There's a risk involved. I really like that definition a lot. Another definition for systems is that you trust a system or an institution, say, or the government or the scientific community. You trust them when you believe that what they do is not prejudiced against you, that it's fair and not prejudiced against you. I think that's That's a really good definition of trust. There are also different kinds, of course. There are individual trust, social trust, cognitive trust. Do I trust this information? Am I getting information that I think is valid? Affective trust. Do I feel warm and concerned about you as a person, such that I would extend you trust? So one is a kind of brain thing about now analyzing the integrity of the information, and another is a kind of a heart thing about how concerned am I about you, that I might make myself vulnerable to you. And maybe I'll stop there, except to say that Frank Fukuyama, a long time ago, said that high trust societies have so many advantages. The economies work better, the politics works better, people are happier, they're more related. So yeah, somebody, Peter's holding up the book. So America is a low trust society. We haven't always been, but in the 1960s, if you ask Americans, do you generally think the government does the right thing either all of the time or most of the time? 77% of Americans said yes in 1964, and now it's down to under 20%. So it's been a huge drop in these recent decades. Another thing you could say, 30 years ago, the question would be, do you generally trust your fellow citizens? So in the mid-90s, nearly 70% of Americans said, yes, I generally trust my fellow citizens. And now it's down to 30% say, I generally trust. And last statistic, today, most Americans in both parties believe that our elections are not trustworthy, that our elections do not produce valid outcomes. You might think that it's one party that believes that. No, majorities of both parties believe that. So we're a very low trust society right now. And Luke, I just think at the heart of our work is the challenge of increasing trust. Not an easy thing to do. And, that's why I'm really happy that we can talk about it tonight.
There's been some pieces coming out at various magazines, both on the left and the right, every couple of years, I think, looking at specifically one of the phenomenons you mentioned there, David, the fact that America had more characteristics of a high trust society as late as the early 1960s. And once you get to the 2010s and 2020s, it's been a much more marked decline from there.
Yeah.
Now, there have been some who have argued that one of the major reasons for that is the increasingly prominent racial diversity of the United States and the fact of more institutionalized racial pluralism in America since at least the late 1960s and early 1970s. That's always sounded interesting, but inconclusive to me. And I was just wondering if you have any specific thoughts on that. There's an implication there, of course, that says that greater diversity means that there's going to be lower trust, and that trust is premised on a kind of homogeneity. And so I was just wondering what your thought is on that in particular.
I think the evidence is fairly clear that more diversity lowers trust, in the short run at least. In the longer run, it may increase trust because we know that in the longer run, a diverse group makes better decisions and does things better than a homogeneous group. But in the short run, particularly if the change is rapid, it increases distrust. Maybe it shouldn't, but it really does. So the faster the social change, the higher levels of mistrust. The more diversity, the higher levels of mistrust. And the other thing we would have to add, a lot of times institutions reveal themselves to be not trustworthy. So, many people believe, and I'm one of them, I'm not saying we all have to believe this, but I believe that telling lies to people by high government officials, it really began to escalate in the mid and late 60s and has stayed fairly high since then, higher than early. This is what I believe. So I believe that, and I believe more Americans believe that high government officials are not telling them the truth. So that would be, I think, another cause of mistrust, to believe that the institutions are simply not performing well. Two more, the more isolated people are, the less connected we are, or if we're only connected to things like video games or we're going to bars or whatever, the less trust we have. The more mobile we are, the less trust we have. So those are some of the influences, I think. But you're right. I mean, the diversity is, it's an issue, and it's a conundrum because in general, diversity has so many benefits. So
it's interesting as well because one of the other trends that that happened in that same time frame between the 1960s and the 2010s was the transition, I think, from the of an American elite that was basically Eastern Ivy Leaguers with a smattering of local elites in various parts of the country, to a much more, and there's reasons related to the GI Bill and the increase in almost universal college education at some levels in that same time frame, and there's other things probably related to the massive increase in the information industries and just science and technology and higher education levels associated with those. But there's a sense in which America prior to the 60s had not had a truly national elite class, right? And so some folks on, and I've seen people talking about this in socialist magazines. I've seen people talking about this in traditionalist conservative magazines nowadays, but you also started to have the rise of something a little bit further away from the classical Tocquevillian kind of somebody can become a leader in their state or their city by rising through the ranks and working with people at a face-to-face level, and suddenly they ship out to a couple handful of universities, either on the East Coast or on the West Coast or at a few spots in between, and join a kind of national, kind of very highly credentialed meritocratic class that is.
And you think that's contributed to
well,
less trust?
I was wondering what you think about this, because I know there's been some people, David Brooks just wrote a piece about this at The Atlantic, reassessing some of his thoughts from a few decades ago. And so I guess part of my question is, do you think there's a way in which this trend towards a national meritocracy in all kinds of sectors, away from the kind of regional leadership?
It's interesting. It's an interesting argument, Luke. I'm from Mississippi, and a lot of times, well, in general, but especially when I'm in my home state of Mississippi, a lot of people will say, especially conservatives, they'll just say, what I really hate is being looked down on by these people. What I really hate is being assumed that I'm stupid or something like, so there could be a kind of feeling of anger or mistrust or alienation from people who seem to be sort of believe themselves to be a kind of superior group. I know a lot of people who do. I don't know that, well, it makes sense. Your argument makes sense. In populists in our history have played upon that. If you go back to the Wallace campaign in 1968, and even further back than that, one of the primary claims of populists is these people don't know what it's like to be you. They don't give a damn about you, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, maybe there's something to that. It's a good thought.
Well, it's just interesting because it's obviously a quite multifaceted phenomenon, right? And you had mentioned the aloneness question. There's Robert Putnam just came out with another book, I think about a year ago, talking about his thesis on bowling alone back in the 90s about the just decline of civic associations as well too. So
yeah, the lack of face-to-face connectedness. Also, it doesn't get mentioned much, but I think that the weakening of families has something to do with it, because generally trust begins sort of locally and closely. Generalized trust flows from individual trust relationships. It typically doesn't go the other way. You don't begin by trusting the world and then learn to trust the person you're living with, your next door neighbor. It generally goes the other way. And so if you have a fragmented family situation where, let's say, you don't really trust your father, because he's not really, hasn't been a part of your life. That's a pretty big deficit on the trust factor when it comes to generally trusting people in positions of authority, you know. It's not discussed much, except among family psychologists, but I really think it's a meaningful factor. I don't think it's simply a coincidence that the weakening of family bonds among the, say, 70% of the population, the lesser elite, you know, 70% of the population, has coincided with those exact same groups of people demonstrating much less trust of others, of the system, et cetera.
David, do you think it's accurate to say that there's been a way not only in which the questions of differences in family stability, right, have affected social trust? Do you think there are ways that has also affected political polarization as well at a broader level beyond that, or do you think it's a more complicated phenomenon than that too?
I hadn't really thought about it in terms of partisan politics, and I have to think about that more. Mm-hmm. I do think there are actually data on the issue of trust. That's why I brought that up.
Yeah. Well, I bring that up just because it's fascinating. Again, society being a complicated organism of sorts, right? It's just fascinating how many different ways this general phenomenon kind of crops up. And so
I just wanted to just emphasize one more thing, which is it's possible to think about trust as a trait that you have, like, oh, Luke, you're a trusting person, as if it has something to do with kind of your, biogenetic code of some kind. Well, that's one way to think of it. But I really think we have to think of trust as a social phenomenon and as an aspect of relationship. And so what's going wrong when there's less trust is something going on with our relationships with one another. That's really that's the heart of the thing I want to say.
Well, can you expand on what some of that might mean for how we would go about addressing that at a social level then?
Well, one of the things is that we have a lot of people today who say that there's these other Americans who are being carried away with conspiracy theories. They no longer recognize what a fact is. They're no longer interested in the truth of things. We're in a post-truth era, and people are just not recognizing basic facts because they're so filled with their political zeal, and they're listening to conspiracy theories on the internet. And what on God's name is wrong with these people? What is wrong with them? Anybody ever heard that idea? Anybody ever had that idea? And what I want to say about that is a lot of this depends. I don't think it's because people got stupid. I don't think it's because they have bad faith, because they all of a sudden stopped caring what was true, because they're too stupid to look things up. I don't think any of those are to blame. I think what happened is we now trust different sources of information. And whereas we used to have commonly trusted sources. So, for example, I personally believe in the importance to do something about man-made climate change. I, David Blankenhorn, believe that. But I don't know the first damn thing about climate science. I perform no experiments. I don't even know anybody who is a climate scientist. The only reason I believe what I just said is because I generally trust the scientists who say these things. But what if I didn't? What if I had reasons not to trust them at all? What if I had a trust in a completely different source of information? I think that's what's really going on today. I don't think it's, so therefore, when we as a society, when our group of friends just denounces other people as stupid, or, what's wrong with you? What is wrong with you people? I don't really think, I think that misses the point. It's not bad people. It's a badly structured society so that we don't have any way anymore of finding trust in common sources of truth. We don't do that. But I think what we do is we take the easy way out and just castigate these other individuals. Meanwhile, they're castigating us in the same way.
David, let's push on to one of the next themes that I think it's important to discuss here. So we've talked a little bit in the past about the comparative levels of trust in different segments of the American population, right? And I was just wondering if you could outline for us how you think about that in terms of to what degree there are people in America who feel more alienated than other people in America.
In general, the more privileged you are, the more trusting you are of your world. That's like an iron law of sociology. And why wouldn't it be that way? Why wouldn't it be that way if life is unfolded nicely for you and you know, I don't know, you know, noodle salad at the beach, nice education, you safe neighborhood, and not that you don't have problems, but you're in this world where things have been okay, you tend to be much more trusting. If you are an African American, if you are a person of color who's experienced prejudice, if you do not have the privileges, if you do not have the access to opportunity, if you've experienced hatred against you, or people have treated you badly, or grew up in a family where you didn't know where you just felt like you were just vulnerable all the time. You lived in a crummy neighborhood where you thought you were going to get shot at or beaten up or robbed. Well, you don't tend to trust the world around you. I mean, why would you? Why would you? So I think the trust is related to privilege and class to a tremendous degree. And why wouldn't it be, you know? So I don't really think it's right to say, well, what's wrong with these people who don't trust anybody? That's not the right question to ask. Yeah, I'd say that's and then we've mentioned a couple of others. The more alienated and disconnected you are, the more sort of living life alone, the more you're likely to feel that the things around you are not to be trusted. Where the more connected you are, the more likely you are to feel that, you know, the world is a place of some kind of generosity and abundance, you know. So
at some level, I've heard that a lot of the arguments about the white working classes alienation in a kind of red sense, and the urban black working classes alienation in a
well, those would be the two kind of
parallel
extreme examples, right? I mean, you have the two of the lowest trusting groups in the country are, I mean, just to speak kind of crudely in generalizations, please don't think I'm trying to put everybody in a label, but in general, if you're a blue collar, white, Protestant, conservative, religious conservative person who voted for Trump, and you're very likely to have a high levels of mistrust. You're likely to believe easily that there was fraud in the election and that Trump really was the president, but he got cheated out of it. You're likely to believe that the doctors who tell you stuff about masks and vaccine do not have your best interest at heart, and right on down the line. And on the other end of the spectrum, if you're African American or a Latino or persons who've experienced racism or just been through hard knocks, you're much more likely to feel that, you know, really, these people have my best interest at heart? Really? I'm supposed to trust them that they're going to do something that's good for me? No. So, and yeah, you remember our friend Hawk Newsom the other day, the Black Lives Matter leader. I think Hawk's terrific, but he really irritated me. He said, he was quoted in the New York Times on the vaccine issue. He said, yeah, what have these people ever done for us? meaning the public health people, what have they ever done for us? What have they ever told us that we should believe in? And I was like, oh, come on, Hawk. But then I thought about it a minute and I said, well, I don't know. I guess I could try to understand what he's saying, you know? Such a low proportion of young African-American men in New York City have been vaccinated. Hawk's a young African-American man. Well, what's that all about? You know, just like, let's think about that a minute.
It is striking because there's obviously that, and then there's a very strong conservative and generally kind of more rural associated conservative kind of antipathy to vaccines as well too, right? And so that's been one of the things in the last just year alone, David, that's made this analysis that you're thinking about really like real to me as I've been observing social life nowadays.
The vaccine issue is a good example of this. I think the trust in elections, whether the elections process is rigged, it is another good example. And in general, do you believe that the people in office are even trying to do the right thing? Forget whether they do or they don't. Do you believe they're even trying to do the right thing? Those two groups we've talked about, blue collar white Protestants who go to church, and African Americans and their other allies who have experienced prejudice, they are highly likely in large numbers to say that the people in power are not even trying to do what's good for us.
At an institutional level, what do you think do you see any hope at all at an institutional level in terms of how media and the public health community and educational authorities and anybody in government, anybody in that general kind of world of institutions that once had higher levels of trust from the public than they do at this point, right? Have you seen any kind of hopeful points, I guess, in terms of things that people in our leadership have been doing that might be either like good faith efforts to restore that trust, or maybe just very practical ways to bring it back? Have you seen any hope on that?
Well, I was hoping that's what we could talk about in the discussion. There are a lot of good people out there. This is still a pretty darn wonderful country, and there are a lot of people out there who are heartsick over this and would like to do something better, and many of them are a part of efforts to do something better. It's hard for me to see any big examples, like in terms of media, for example, which I do believe is a pretty important contributor to all this. You would want to have some version of a recreation for modern conditions of journalistic standards, things like fact checking, editing, all these really now completely bygone practices that tried to, balanced reporting. You would need something like that for the modern era, and I don't really see it. I just don't see it at all. But maybe, and I know some people in Facebook and other places are trying to think about some things like that, but I don't know. I think the big problem with social trust is that it's easier to talk about how we tore it down than how we could build it back up. Because in general, it's easier to destroy something than to create something, right? The act of destruction is much quicker, easier, more, societies can tear things down pretty quickly, but building something up that is inherently fragile, as trust is, that's a much tougher nut. Of course, we at Braver Angels try to do it by building relationships across division. And, like the guy in our workshop, in one of our first workshops, he said, at the end, he said, it's really hard to hate somebody And that's kind of in a nutshell what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people to rediscover some kind of civic friendship based on personal relationships. How you scale that, how all that begins to affect institutions. Can it begin to affect institutions? These are all very tough questions. So I'm going to defer to my colleagues here on this call to come up with the trust agenda.
Well, on that
I will
note,
say one thing about the trust agenda. It's something somewhat similar to the love agenda. And I mean that quite seriously. Trust is something best produced by giving it to somebody. You know what I mean? It's like the loaves and fishes in the Bible story. That's where trust is an abundant good. If you give somebody your trust, even if you're not sure they deserve it, A, that puts you at risk. B, that's the best way to generate trust. You give it away in order to have it grow. I really think that's true. And yet that's really hard to do, particularly if you're not sure that the thing or person you're trusting deserves your trust. And if you think that giving them your trust could hurt you in some way. But it really is I remember Marilyn Robinson in one of her novels, she said, the challenge with democracy in really hard times is you have to treat your fellow citizens the way they should. You have to treat them as if they are the kind of person they should be, even if you're not sure they are. That's incredibly hard. It's incredibly hard. But I don't know if somebody's got to somebody who's listening here, please weigh in on this during the discussion, because I really think, I don't mean to sound overly, I don't know, theological or something, but I really think this is the heart of it.
David, to what degree do you think that there's a way in which shared experience that's not necessarily directed towards building trust, but is directed towards maybe more mundane things, right?
Yeah,
is something that
definitely
that builds it over time, kind of unintentionally, but
Yeah.
more securely, right?
I think there's a lot to that, Luke. For example, if you let's just take white people like the two of us who might harbor racial prejudices. And let's stick 20 or 30 guys like us in a room with a bunch of African Americans and tell us something like, well, you people just kind of try to get along and work something out. The chances are that racially prejudiced thoughts and actions are just going to pour out of us, because we're in a structure where but if you took the same frail white people, vulnerable to prejudicial thinking, and you put them in a different situation, I mean the exact same people, and said, in order to get something important for yourself, you need to work with these African American guys, where you need to do this. A good thing will happen if you figure out a way to work together. We'll work together. Same people. And there won't be the racism will plummet. So that's why I don't like it when people say, oh, these people are racists. I'm not racist, but these other people, oh, terrible racists. I don't like that. I don't think calling people racist will ever make them less racist. And the only way that will make any of us less racist is, well, maybe not the only way, but the main way is to be in a structure, to be in a context where treating another person with respect is going to produce a positive result for yourself and for society. So.
David, there's a lot of structural questions I have, just questions on for how you think about this on things like civic education and national service and localism and all that. But I want to get to another part that I think is key.
So I think a national service would be really good trust building institution.
Well, for what it's worth, everybody, there is a Braver Angels debate tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern time on national service. If you
do you agree, Luke? Do you think that's true? A national service? Whenever you had a universal draft, you could say good or bad things about it, but it was definitely it mixed people from different classes. It produced loyalty to an institution and set of ideals and to another group of people who are very different from you.
I'll I'll go. I'll answer that very quickly so we can get to the election question a little bit more deeply before Q&A. But in a nutshell, I think national service has good prospects and it certainly should be expanded. I don't know that I believe it would be the unifying force down to a deep level that it often is imagined that it might be. After all, I mean, most of the major statesmen in the post-World War II era had served in World War II, right? And that included everybody as far apart as Joe McCarthy, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, George McGovern, and Barry Goldwater and Richard Nixon, right? And so there might be ways in which it can help people at an individual level and maybe at a civic level. I don't know that it makes the trust unity at a deep level that we're thinking about.
Yeah. You don't think it's a big panacea? Yeah,
I would have to think. I would have to look
Yeah.
more into the history, but I have a skepticism there. That being said, I think it's and this is one of the reasons I'm excited for the debate tomorrow night is that there's much to think on there.
I just think any institutions that cause us to relate to one another across differences for a common purpose, you know, anytime that can happen, you're going to have that phenomenon of coming to like and trust people who are different from you because you are working together for an objective that you both believe in. And those institutions, I mean, it's hard to really point to any of them anymore, really, that we have. So anyway, maybe national service is not it, but I've always been a kind of a fan of that idea.
I think there's a big question is what would it be expected to do, right? And I think it can build those virtues for sure. I just think the question is to what degree do those virtues counteract the actual political tendencies that we have as well? And that's an open question. I want to reframe a little bit to the elections question in particular, though, because that's obviously one of the big things that's going to be on the American mind for the next couple of years. And so at some level, there were protests of some sorts after the 2016 election. There were protests of other sorts after the 2020 elections. And in general, it seems like at a national level, we Americans don't trust each other enough and don't even fully trust our system of government enough to either accept the results of the elections at a deep level or to trust that our country is going in a way that we can all
you saw it in 2000. You said lots of people, lots of Democrats believed that George Bush was not the legitimately elected president and said so as loudly as they could. The two Obama elections, I think it was different unless you believed he wasn't a citizen, which of course a lot of people did. And then after that, the number of people who believed my guy lost because it was rigged, it keeps going up and up and up. So
my question
in both parties, I just want to say both parties tend to believe this. A lot of progressives now are self-righteously pointing fingers at conservatives who are delusional, fantasists, and so on. Maybe, but when the shoe's on the other foot, many Democrats and many progressives believe my guy lost because the system was rigged.
To what degree do you think this is something that can be fixed by leaders at top institutions making the choice, like in the days after the elections, to tell people who admire them accept it? Or to what degree do you think there's a question of a deeper kind of institutional trust that needs to be built at those institutional levels too?
I think it's a deeper issue. I mean, I think right now we're kind of in a culture war over this, where the huge part of the country believes that voter fraud robs their people. And another very large part of the country believes that voter suppression is the order of the day in many, many states. And those two groups, who intensely mistrust one another, are just fighting it out. Each side imagining that they're going to vanquish the other side through political power, but that's not going to happen. These are two big groups. And so I think that the trick of the only way we're going to work through this problem is not to have one side vanquish the other, even though short-term victories can happen. But the only really way to fix it is to have both groups through some form of relationship, compromise, negotiation, trying to understand the position that the other people have. Some form of that is going to have to produce changes in our system that increase the belief on both sides that the system is basically working. Because right now, most people believe that it's not working. And I don't think just having the, I don't think that passing that law in Georgia that all the progressives hate is going to fix the problem. And I don't think that defeating the law in Georgia that progressives hate is going to fix the problem. And I don't think that passing HR 1 in the House is going to fix the problem. I just think it has to be a deeper form of relationship building among people across differences, so that both groups can feel that we're beginning to make some progress on common ground approaches. I think that's the only way to do it, or else we're just going to never believe that the system is valid. I don't know how long a democracy can last when most people don't even believe that the elections are fair. So.
David, I'm wondering, do you think there's a sense in which buy-in to the American system and to whatever the results elections have, or just to the American kind of status quo in general, do you think there's a degree to which that is premised on what people think they're getting out of it and whether people think they have a say in it? Or do you think it's based on other things than the direct kind of sense of ownership and sense of involvement of it?
That's a great question. I don't really know. I don't really know. Lincoln said it all boiled down to the mystic chords of memory. I think by that he meant that we have experienced some things in common by virtue of inhabiting one community, and that those have powerful holds over our hearts. I'd go with that if I had to pick one thing. But I don't know, man, it's a great question. So many immigrants have come here historically, and they tended to be very patriotic because they believe that they were able to live a life here that they're really grateful to have been able to come here and do. Not all immigrants, but many, many immigrants. So I guess you could say they wanted a particular thing and they got it here. It's a great question. Where does that willingness to extend trust and faith, does that come from kind of having gotten the things you think you deserve from the system? Or are there other issues involved as well? I think there are other issues involved. I'm going to go back to mystic chords of memory.
Well, may we work together to build up some more of these mystic chords of memory among ourselves with our fellow Americans.
Yeah.
There are all kinds of great questions that have been coming through in the chat, and I've seen a couple hands start to get raised a little bit early. So I just want to invite everybody to start raising their hands to get in the queue. And we'll transition over to the Q&A session in just a minute here. But David, I have one last question for you that I guess more directly relates to the work we do over Braver Angels and how that relates to all this. So obviously, Braver Angels is what some have called politically family therapy. The core of what we do is the workshops. The core of what we do is person to person, getting to know each other across all kinds of divides. That's a very intensely trust building activity. It doesn't scale as fast as we would hope, but it builds it there. And so what do you think at a level of divides that are not just about politics, things that are questions of culture and identity on the one hand, and also just general social kind of atomization on the other hand, to what degree do you think there's lessons directly coming up from what we've been practicing for the last 4 years for things at a level beyond what we've ever imagined we could do. What do you think there's ways that the lessons that we figured out among ourselves as a community here can be useful to American social entrepreneurs in general in the next several decades?
Well, some of it depends, Luke, on how well we continue to do in our work. I mean, we're a growing organization. The research that has been done has shown that what we're doing is successful. People walk out of our activities generally less polarized than when they came in. I think part of it for me is I try to think about the future. Can we take the model that we have shown works at the grassroots level and take it into the halls of power? Can we go to elected officials and their networks? Can we go to institutions of higher education? Can we go to civil society, business organizations? Can we go to the system or the systems and say, if you're experiencing dysfunction as a result of polarization, which of course political institutions are, and so many institutions of higher education are, if you're experiencing this, would you consider the fact that this kind of work that we've done at the grassroots would also help you with your institutional problems? I think there's some validity to that. I'd like to give that our best shot. And because there are some lessons we've learned about, again, the importance of relationship and the importance of we didn't really talk about this much, but Braver Angels is based on the principle that the main crisis is one of what the scholars call affective polarization. It's not issue polarization. It's not like, oh, some people believe this form of healthcare, other people believe that form of healthcare. Some people believe the high tax rate should be this, some people believe should be that. Those are important. And of course, there are differences, and the differences are important. And we fight these out at election time. But the real source of our misery, the real source of our political paralysis is not the disagreement on issues. It's the growing intensity of dislike we have for others. So it's not just that I think you're wrong about an issue. I think you're like a bad person. I think you're a threat to everything I believe in. Like, I'm worried about you personally, Luke. How could a person with any decency, how could a person with any level of education possibly think what you think? How could that be? I'm baffled. Explain this to me. How you and your crowd seem to be so detached from decency, from morality, from attendance. That's affective polarization. It's not that we disagree. It's that I'm pointing to you personally as a bad or untrustworthy or flawed human being that threatens my country. That's the thing that's killing us. Because, they show, there was a great experiment they did. You probably saw this. They would show people two solutions to the healthcare crisis, and they would say, which one do you like most? And we just read one solution, read another solution. And liberals, conservatives, independents, they were all over the map in choosing whatever they wanted to choose. They give people the same people the same two answers and say, here are two answers to the healthcare question. This is the conservative answer and this is the liberal answer. Which one do you like? Like lemmings, people just choose the one that is their team's choice. So it's not, the issues are important. Disagreement about the issues is important. But the real thing that's like a dagger in the heart of our democracy is when half the country pretty much has contempt for the other half.
I want to say that I'm not exactly sure how somebody could have the crazy, ridiculous opinions that someone like me has.
Yeah, that's right.
So you're onto something.
That's right. I'm onto something about you, Luke.
Let's go into Q&A because there's a lot of voices who've been sending a lot of interesting questions in that I want to go ahead and bring into this. Quick rules for Q&A, everybody. Please make sure to raise your hands for this. We have a smaller room tonight, so I will try to get everybody in if we can. Please feel free to elaborate on your questions while you're asking them, but please make sure to keep them fundamentally in the form of a question as well. And we'll arrange that as we get a little bit further on. But first, let's go to Pat Butler. Pat, please unmute yourself and ask your question of David.
Well, this may not be a question. From my experience, if the people who thinks the elections are rigged, I invite them to be a poll worker. By the time you go through 2 or 3 hours of training, you get there a half hour before the polls open. You're there all day. You cannot leave the premises and then come back. That's forbidden. You can't leave at the end of the day until all the numbers add up. You know how many ballots you got at the beginning of the day. Your machine counts how many were cast. You count by hand the number of ballots there weren't. I mean, there's just no way that it can be rigged. So that would be my suggestion. And they always need poll workers, by the way.
Thank you, Pat.
I think it's a great idea, and it could be maybe generalizable that that participating in an institution is really terrific, you know, and it could be that what you're saying is right, that participating in a well-functioning institution will build that trust in an institution. It also direct experience with a poorly functioning institution. When I was a young guy in the South, you know, when African-American people saw up close how the system worked, they knew what they were up against. They got it, you know. So I think it's I think that's a smart thing to say. You got a problem with something, you're worried about something, participate in it, see what it is up close. I think that's just a great idea.
Well, David, that's one of the ways that national service actually might be an interesting kind of thing too, in expanding people's experiences throughout all kinds of things.
Go to some place that you only have ideas about, you know. And also, we haven't talked much about class segregation tonight, Luke, but we're more class segregated than we have probably ever been. And so, you know, most upscale people only see other upscale people. You know, maybe somebody comes and mows their grass or something, but they're mostly around other people pretty much like them, who vote like them, think like them, and you know, so on down the line. So I really think anything from school to anything that can, churches, anything that can try to push back in the other direction against class segregation, I think would just be a good thing for all of us.
Let's go to a question from Peter Gisela real quick. Peter, did I pronounce your last name right?
I think he's muted.
Peter, we are having trouble hearing you. We're still having trouble hearing you. Keep your hand up and work on your audio. And Ibrahim and Sasha, if you can chat to him and help him with that. Meantime, let's go over to. Oh, wait, Peter, is that you? Can you?
Yeah.
Great, cool. Ask away.
I hit the up arrow and change configuration.
We hear you loud and clear.
All right. So I have a question about, you know, your organization and spreading this debate on trust and national service in an accountability way. Now, for me, I'm going to use my hand as a metaphor. Trust is the thumb, and there's a whole library of books on this topic of trust. And so it's so easy to get lost into all of the complexity. And I know, because I've been looking at it for 42 years and got a degree in behavioral science, and learned there aren't very easy answers. There's lots of nuance, and lost complexity. So I've been interested in a solution that I discovered in San Jose, California, back in 1979. A local moderate congressman proposed to expand the mission of the Selective Service System's registration process only. No mandatory service. The only goal was to move the registration to age 17 birthday to include young women with young men, and encourage a 1 year, I'd like to insert always on and off debate about civic values, civic education, and the consideration of volunteering for work with nonprofits, AmeriCorps-like programs, which didn't exist then, but was in his bill, and military service. Now, as a veteran, Vietnam era veteran who joined the Air Force rather than get drafted, I know something about that, but I also had some experiences with the Yom Kippur War and a future war in the Persian Gulf and that. So my frustration is after 9/11, I started getting photographs with hundreds of people every year in San Francisco and at UC Berkeley on this subject because nobody replies, 99% silence to the idea of moving registration to 817. Now in this year, I would say that it would not be even mandatory registration, that it would be volunteer registration, especially since they're moving to include women next year in the registration process, if they also announced an encouragement. Now, most of the debate and talk in every zip code, in every community across the country would be done by local government, local high schools, local people. Sorry. Here's an article from Time Magazine from 2007. I have about 200 to 300 photographs with players in our society with this in there, but I have 0 replies from them.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead and finish up.
Okay. The thing I'm pursuing this year is to create a website that I collect open letters to people like you that I never get replies from, but just collect the index listing of hundreds of professional experts, politicians, corporate CEOs, and explain this idea and say, why are they all apathetic, ignorant? Am I the only scholar in the United States that sees the value in this and that I'm not marketing myself well enough to persuade the people that
I hear you. I hear you.
Thank you.
I think it's a really promising idea. I don't know that, I'd have to think about the details. I tend to be supportive of your idea. I am supportive of that general idea, how authoritative it would need to be, the particulars of it. But I'm a strong proponent of the kind of thing you're saying. And, I wish you the best. And maybe we could, I don't know, Luke, maybe we should do something on something like that on our podcast and, try to stir up a little bit because I know some people, I know some very conservative people who've come out for this idea. And I know some very liberal progressive people who have, including a lot in Braver Angels. So maybe it's something we should, try to kick up some dust about.
Well, it's interesting to me too, because obviously national service is one of the things that I think about that Braver Angels is doing a little bit of programming on. And, for what it's worth, in years of reading on it, I haven't heard anybody talk specifically about the connection to the selective service system.
It's interesting. And it's also interesting, the idea that started at 17. That's a really interesting thought.
Peter, thank you for speaking up and bringing this. I just sent you my email. I'd love to chat with you after this about that. So. Let's go to another question right now, real quick from Marta Nieves. Marta, good to see you again.
Yes, David, I was very pleased when I heard you say that trust can be built in a family. What I'm seeing in these days, and I have a lot of background in social services, and I've also worked in the corporate sector for 11 and a half years. In fact, I was hired because I was able to bring in the human relations piece and the trust piece and that sort of thing. And it makes a big difference no matter where you work. But when you said that you can't be discriminating against a person or that disliking someone that you have gotten to know, that's the big key. And national service would be great, but everybody's not suited for that. So I think we need to build communities in work settings and also in not just the corporate sector, but in NGOs, groups that are not governmental groups. You can build a lot of relationships. I've worked for Girl Scouts professionally. I have worked for Girls Incorporated. Where are those organizations now? Young people are they're associating with each other. So how can they build trust with adults when they hardly spend any time? with
It's
adults.
really, it's really a great
Trust
point.
is the key thing, and we didn't talk enough about that.
Yeah.
You know, I also have discovered, I have a master's in social work, and one of the things that came across so funny is that there are people who initially will trust first and run the risk of being hurt. I tend to be that way. I trust first. I see a person and I want to get to know who that person is. And I treat them with caring and respect. And so I have had very little trouble in the mainstream. I'm Cuban descent, I'm Latina, I'm bilingual. And I can move into a lot of different communities. And I've done that in the 50 years I've been here in Bellevue, Nebraska, because I've worked in the city of Omaha
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
So what I hope other people, I'd like to hear, how did you build trust? You know, me, it was in my family, like you said, a lot of people build it in their families. Not that my family was so perfect, because there were issues. My father left when I was 10 years old and I hardly saw him again. But there was trust in my family.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a great point. And I particularly like what you said about the difficulty, but also the profound, the sort of generativity
Yes.
of offering trust, and you don't quite know what'll happen with it. That's why I'm so interested in the loaves and fishes story in the Bible. You know,
Yes.
in other words, you just have a few fish and a few loaves, start handing them out.
Yes.
Really?
People pull them out of their pockets.
Really? What's going to happen there? And however you read that story, however one wants to read, of course, and big debates about how you read the Bible. But to me, the loveliness of that story is something was done on faith that produced something very abundant that could not have been produced otherwise. And I think trust is that kind of a good, when in the final analysis, at least trust in its most pure and beautiful form is that.
Right, not to manipulate.
It's produced, it's gained by giving it. It's gained by giving it. And I don't mean to sound weird about that, but I think that's what you described. That's what you described. And so how do we have a society where those parts of us can kind of come to the fore, you know? How do we do that?
That's why I joined Braver Angels.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I loved is when I watched that initial film and I saw the transformation in some of the people in that group.
Yeah.
And I'm a busy woman, but I just said, I've got to be part of that.
Yeah.
I can bring that to the table.
Well, I was in the room, sister, and I felt the same way. I mean, it was just it was a very profound thing to see. And you see the change. In fact, I'll tell you just a very quick, funny story. It was very meaningful to me. David Lapp was in that film, a guy who was my colleague and one of my colleagues, and having that first meeting. Afterwards, we were sitting around talking about it, and one of the people who was at the session was very moved by the whole thing. She said, oh gosh, she says, tomorrow, we won't have this anymore and we'll just be back in the real world.
No.
And David looked up with this wonderful face and said, well, what if this is the real world? Isn't that great? What if this is reality?
Absolutely.
What if this is the real thing? This right here. What if this is the thing? And the other stuff is not quite the right thing. That's not real. Isn't that a nice way to think about it?
It's true. It's true. I believe it. Faith. We didn't talk about faith.
Yeah.
Truth and faith. You can have faith in one another if you have trust with one another.
Yeah. Thank you.
Marta, thank you for this, and thank you for sharing this as well. And it's always great to see you. You always ask the same sort of like energy questions in this, and so it's always good to see you at these. Thanks for coming again. So David Lindenfield, your hand had been up. Did you still have a question you wanted to ask? Or David Lindenfield, you're still muted right now.
Right. I lowered it because this is kind of on a different level, but I'd like to get your thoughts on it. It seems to me that one of the main contributing factors to this crisis of trust that we have in our politics is the fact that election campaigns have gotten longer and longer. No sooner is one over than the next one starts. And if you think about it, an election campaign puts primacy and makes socially acceptable winners versus losers, and the inertia that builds in that over time leads to exaggeration, denunciation, demonization. And I've worked in campaigns where I think I've been focusing on people that I basically think are good people, but I see that process happening just in the course of it, given the pressure. Now, other countries have limited election time campaign.
Well, they tend to have parliamentary systems, and the election is very it's a very short period of time. I think it does have a lot of advantages.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's possible legally in our system or not.
Yeah,
I think it's worth looking into.
Yeah, it's one of those reforms that we could consider. Another thing I like that doesn't have much chance of becoming reality here, but you probably know that in Australia they have mandatory voting. Everybody's expected to vote. You're supposed to vote, and if you don't vote, you pay a small fine. Well, we have a very kind of individual rights-oriented society, and most people wouldn't want that. But the reason I think it's good is because, first of all, participating has its own reward. It helps you. It's a little bit like we're talking about trust. The way to get the thing is to do the thing. And also, it encourages politicians, because they know everybody's going to vote. They don't have to worry about turning out their base, which means the most extreme members of their constituents. So the only thing they can spend their time on is actually making arguments to the general level, because they know everybody's going to vote. So it's not like, oh, get out and vote because otherwise the world will end. It incentivizes non-extreme campaigning. And I think that would be another one of those sort of technical changes in this. I don't think we'll be able to do that here because there's not public support. But in Australia, I have some friends from Australia who tell me on both sides, they'll say, this really works. This really helps us. It helps both parties because it makes good politicians, good, people with integrity about what they're doing. It helps them rise to the top. Short campaigns when everybody votes. That's what we're saying here, I think.
There's probably a fascinating conversation to be had on just the way the American political kind of structure itself can be helpful, but also sometimes harmful for trust issues. And so, David, maybe that's something for us to look into in time.
Yeah, I mean, we have. I'm just very briefly. We have a system of polarized parties where there's no such thing anymore really as a conservative Democrat or a liberal Republican. The parties have now sorted along ideological lines, but they're still in a constitutional system of checks and balances so that neither party can really execute its will, even if it's ideologically consistent. So in some ways, we're getting the worst of both worlds. We have a parliamentary style system and the parties are ideologically coherent, but they're still in a structure where they can't actually implement their agenda, even if have the presidency or whatever. So you have this kind of paralysis where these highly ideological groupings just go bang, 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 but nobody prevails. It's just kind of a stalemate. So, smart people who think about our system, I think, need to try to think about that.
David, related to that, I got a question in the chat. Somebody was asking, you had mentioned a study on policy preferences that did not include the names liberal and whether things were liberal or conservative.
Yeah.
What was the name of that? I want to find it and put it in the chat for people.
I don't know. I can't remember. I'll have to look it up, Luke.
Okay, no worries. We'll figure this out sometime soon. Thank you, David.
There are other experiments of that nature that show that that what you really want to do is root for your team. And if somebody can just show you how to do that, you will.
Let's and by the way, everybody, this is going. I'm a fan of a lot of the diversity of the questions here. Feel free to keep letting us know if you have questions and raising your hands. But meantime, let's go over to a question from Rita Chisholm. Rita.
Hello, everyone. So glad to be here. Thank you, David, for being with us tonight. And I wanted to start out by telling you that there really aren't enough words to thank you and David and Bill for, bringing this organization together. I was not very political previously and had a heartache that really brought me to. I actually had two friends, one red and one blue, that suggested Braver Angels to me. So I'm very thankful for the organization. I wanted
thank
to
you, Rita, thank you for saying that, and thank you for your work and involvement. This is kind of a grassroots thing. It's only as good as the people who do it, and you're one of them. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And it's been a pleasure. I am learning, even at 63, they say if we're not learning, we're probably dead. So I'm glad to still be learning. But I wanted
where are you from, Arkansas? Where are you from?
I was raised in Mississippi on the Mississippi Gulf Coast.
Well, that's why I like you. I knew there was a reason why I liked you. Where in Mississippi?
Oh, well, actually a little town by the name of Goshen, outside of Pascagoula, where the English buildings.
Of course, that's where you're from. Yes. Well, that's great. I'm from Jackson. So
yes, I read when I found Braver Angels, I read and read for days about Braver Angels. So I got real informed.
Oh, good. Bless you.
I'm very thankful for your organization.
I didn't mean to sidetrack us there. I just a little personal story. When my mom was involved in church work, she went to a retreat in Montreat, North Carolina, and she came back. I said, "Mom, how'd it go?" She said, "Oh, it was so fun. I stayed up talking with one girl all night, and by morning we discovered we were related." So,
oh my God.
So we can discover we're related, Rita.
Oh my gosh. Well, I don't know. I've got Italian roots also, so maybe.
All right. So let's go to a question.
Okay. So it sounds like there's a lot of social trust here.
Yes.
So we have that started.
Well, I'm feeling pretty good, and I'm kind of like Marta. I kind of was raised with that kind of a attitude that to go in and, well, actually, and I was going to say, I don't want to sound Pollyannish, but I was blessed to be raised by an Italian mother who had a very loving heart. And one of the things that, we often don't realize until we're in our more mature years, just how blessed we were by the lessons that our parents teach us.
Ain't it true? Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. And
Definitely
I would have sworn to you I was not listening half the time, but it penetrated. So,
yeah.
But one of the things that was taught, especially by my mom, was that the number one thing was that regardless of any other characteristic, it didn't matter if it was the color of your skin, the home you lived in, the car you drove, the clothes you wore. We were raised in a very humble home, but we were taught that each individual has just an immense value, that we have all been given gifts and talents, and that those are very definitive from God, have a lot of purpose. And so we were taught that to remember that when we looked at another person, if we had something ugly or, we needed to remember that God made them and that he was the one that by that mere fact that they're a child of God, that their value is way beyond what we could really understand. And we needed to respect that. And that was also actually shown in, it was modeled in my home also.
Yeah, that's beautiful. When I was young, I was really influenced by a religious community run by Dorothy Day called Catholic Workers.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked Dorothy Day one time what their basic philosophy was. And she said, "Our philosophy is to see Jesus in every person's face." Isn't that interesting? I'm not trying to make a Christian pitch here. I'm just saying that was their way. That was that community's way of saying every person has infinite value and you need to see it when you look at them. It's really interesting. Next time you want to demonize somebody and call them idiots or something, think about that. I'd try to what am I seeing in their face, you know?
And we have to give each other a chance too. You know, that trust issue is a big thing, because when people have been hurt people, right? But another thing to add to that, there's a song by Amy Grant, a Christian artist, that was called My Father's Eyes. And basically it said, you know, when I see them, I see them through my Father's eyes.
Nice.
I want to have a question though. I'm sorry to take so much time, but I had something that came to my Luke knows me all too well. What something that came to my mind as I was sitting here, because I'm a Trump voter, but I really had a very difficult time with the man himself, as far as his, you know, his disrespect toward people. I just really did not like that. It was very difficult for me to vote for him, actually. But my question is this: when all of this division started happening, I was really taken aback. I had a friend that kind of pulled out of a 50-year relationship with me because of my vote. And then I had friends who actually, their daughter and son-in-law had decided they could no longer talk to them because they had voted for Trump.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was trying to, I was just, you know, I'm analyzing, well, and something came to me. Do you believe that it's possible that Trump embodied a lot of the hurt? He embodied for people the ugliness that they would see in our world. And so because of that, because I voted for Trump, they couldn't see beyond they don't know what my reasoning is, right? So now they've equated me with a man that is very disrespectful to people. And I'm just kind of wondering, because I know that people that I wasn't allowed to hate. That was just one of those things we didn't do in our family. But I know people that literally hate Trump. And I believe, unfortunately, even though my reasoning was well beyond who he was, I got equated with someone that liked him, I guess. And so do you think that could have been a part of the polarization does that play into that at all, the polarization?
I think it definitely does. And the reason I think it does is because it's a kind of a general trend that people tend to think that the other group that they don't like are kind of all alike. They think their own group is disorganized and chaotic, and how are we, but they think that the other group kind of marches in lockstep and everybody believes the same thing in the same way. Mm-hmm. So, and the other thing is that you tend to believe the worst things are motivating your opponents, never the best things. So yeah, I think there's a lot to that, Rita, that is like, what would be the worst reason I could think of for a person to vote for Trump? Therefore, everybody that votes for Trump is doing it for that reason. Yeah.
There was a gentleman who had been trying to raise his hand, and I believe, unfortunately, he's had to leave us, unfortunately, so I don't think we'll get to him. Sorry about that. But let's go to another question right now from Barbara Brown. Barbara?
Hi. You know, I'll have to say, my experience is with kind of middle-class professionals from working-class backgrounds, and we've spent a lot of our lives in really toxic organizations. And you definitely don't turn your back on the management. And one of the things that folks there look at is some of the game theory work, and even some of the research around what happens when people perceive unfairness, right? And there's been some psychological studies on that are pretty telling. And it seems as if one of the conclusions that comes from there is that trust only works if there is a significant chance that folks violating that trust will get caught and outed. They don't even need to be punished. They simply need to be shown in public. But, you know, with our cancel culture, we're not outing lack of trust, we're outing lack of disagreement one would kind of think, lack of agreement, right? And not lack of being trustworthy. And so I'm wondering how one would work with that side of the trust equation, that folks who prove themselves to be untrustworthy can be quickly identified. Is it even possible?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Are you citing organizational theory? I mean, organizational culture studies or something? Where are you saying that you come from organizational studies? Is that where
I come from in the middle of organizations, doing team leading and stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm from some organizational theories, also some psychological research. I think I don't remember who did this, but the monkeys who got the bananas or that one, for instance, where
it's really an interesting argument. I'd like to think about that more. In other words, if you're living in a world of unpredictability, so what you expect to happen when trust is violated doesn't happen. That's going to be disorienting and obviously reduce your likelihood to trust. That's a really good point. Really good point.
Well, and in some toxic organizations, let's be honest, you get rewards for being able to stab people in the back.
That's what some people get mad when people start talking about how good trust is, but for this kind of reason. And I do want to say again, there are many good things to say about mistrust. Mistrust can be a powerfully good thing. And sometimes it helps you survive. Sometimes it helps you avoid having great harm come to you. So it's not some continuum where the more you trust everybody, the better it is, and the less you trust anybody, the worse you are. It's not that at all. It's a much more difficult situation. And you're pointing to situations where obviously anybody would trust less in a situation where trust is punished or not. You're not in a situation where your trust is reciprocated in any way or responded to in the way you would expect it to be. Yeah, that's why I want to say trust is not a trait. It's an aspect of social relations.
This is a really interesting thing, David. Do you mind actually diving a little bit deeper into that by chance, or do you think you've said most of your?
Well, I think I've said it, Luke. I don't mean to say it's not a trait, because you could say that because of your biogenetic substrate, that you have a predisposition, say, to be you're open to eating new foods that you don't know about, because you just think it's going to be good because you trust the universe, and that starts showing up when you're 3 or 4 years old. There is evidence of this, and evidence of some children who, if you offer them new food, they immediately say, no, I don't want the new food. I want macaroni and cheese because that's what I'm used to. And so yes, there is something that maybe you come into the world with along that way. But I want to emphasize the importance of understanding trust as part of a relationship, because otherwise, why would it be true that the more hard knocks you've had in life, the less trustworthy you are? I mean, unless you believe that your lack of trust causes you to have the hard knocks, but I don't think that's really a very viable way to think. So in other words, relation, structure, context. And that's something we can do something about. See, we can't really do anything about a lot of this stuff, but establishing a society where the institutions allow us to, what it really comes down to is love each other, but we're going to call it trust for now. That's to some degree socially malleable. We have some control over that. And that's why I just hate it when we just, instead of thinking about that, we just figure out who we don't like or who we think is stupid or who we think is crazy. And we just, oh, these people, how could they do that? No. It's not defective people. It's a defective society because we haven't figured out how to get the structure right.
There's huge implications on this, by the way, for political theory, but I will send you a memo on that later on, David. So
there we go.
Real quick, I saw Deborah Lafferty, you had sent a question earlier looking at things on money and politics. Did you want to ask that vocally, or do you mind if I read that question? Deborah?
Yeah, go ahead. You can read it. Thanks.
No. Well, I mean, if you want to phrase it like in ways that that's even better. So.
Okay. Well, I was just wondering about money and politics. It seems to me that a lot of people have learned more about that. That if our politicians are bought off, we don't really have a true democracy. We can't even get logical, rational gun control, which most Americans want, because our leaders are taking kickbacks. So I'm just wondering what that understanding, what that does to our trust in our institutions.
Thanks, Deborah. David? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'd want to open that up for other people to comment on. I do believe that high levels of inequality, where some people are really just highly privileged in relationship to everybody else, whether it comes to any kind of power. I do believe that correlates with low trust. I just think it's, why wouldn't it? And it does. So maybe that's related to money in politics, because you think that people with a lot of money control things in politics. I'm not really sure if they do or they don't. I don't really know enough about it, but I think your point, to me, what strikes me as really interesting in your point is the argument that if you believe that some people really are able to dominate by virtue of their privileged position, then that does reduce trust. I mean, I think that's just a fact. So I think you're onto something. Yeah.
We're getting towards the end here, so I just want to invite anybody else who has a question, and you are welcome to ask multiple questions if you've already asked as well, so just keep that in mind. We're getting towards the end, so I just want to see if anybody else has questions. Please feel free to put your hands up so we have a final queue going into the end of the hour here. But let's go back to Barbara Brown. Barbara.
You mentioned increasing inequality, and that's certainly true in my lifetime, but it's not true historically. I mean, and so if you go back to Dickens' Britain, for example, I think people were so firmly embedded in their religious idea of class and their place in the world that they were not nearly so angry about some of the things that went on with abuse by the rich and the powerful, right? In other words, if you were an aristocrat, you were born to it, and God put you in that place. If you were a starving pauper, and now, particularly in the last century, we've gotten around that, and people truly believe for a long time, as things got better, that
well, that's a good point. I bet you sound like that. Sounds like that could well be true. So you don't, it kind of points to the danger of making global statements, doesn't it? Like it's always this way. That's a really good point. But maybe in a society that was is shaped by the premise that all people are created equal, then it becomes much more difficult
exactly
to understand or to tolerate situations where power and privilege seem overly concentrated. Although I will say, here's a funny thing I've never figured out. Many progressives will point to this. They'll say, well, it's inequality. That's the worst thing we have. And I'll just say this. I've spent a lot of time talking to, in structured ways like research, people who don't trust the government. They think things are rigged against them. They think everything's a mess. They don't think they get what they deserve from society. And I've spoken to, white Protestant, Baptist and Black Protestant Baptist. And they almost never say they think the rich are the problem. They almost never say that. They almost never say that the world is run by a few rich people at the top and the rest of us suffer. Every once in a while they say that, but usually they say things like, everybody in government is a crook. They say that far more than they say anything else. And I don't know, so I don't know. I think class resentment, if you want to put it that way, exists more prominently in the mind of progressive analysts, possibly than it does in the actual lives of the people they're talking about. That's possibly
except
true.
going back to the middle professional business organizations,
Right.
Especially folks that are over 50 who've seen it go when your boss had 10 times your salary to your boss now having 1,000 times your salary, right? And
well, that's a good point.
And it's that group, I think.
Yeah.
It's not the Baptist right-wing folks that think that at all.
Yeah.
But it is middle-class professionals, especially older ones who've seen stuff go from what they thought the world was improving and economically certainly true, becoming more equitable. And I don't care what race you are.
That's a strong point. Often expresses itself when people talk to me. I think I mentioned this earlier. It comes out in the form of they think they're better than me. They think they're on a high pedestal, and they look down on people like me, and they think we're like, and of course among political conservatives, deplorables. We're just the deplorables in their mind. And so, to me, a lot of that, and that could be what you're talking about, sort of inflected in the language of arrogance, the accusation that these people are detached and arrogant and not really, they don't really care about me. I certainly hear that a lot. So.
And see from the middle, not at all. Quite frankly, a lot of middle-class professionals, at least when they started, were equally arrogant, but they see the money difference, and they see the ability to do things by buying them. I mean,
right.
You talk to working women, for example, and that don't have ultra wealthy husbands, about how hard it is to buy childcare and household care, for example. It's those sort of things that are absolute economic issues.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
Let's go. We have 10 minutes left for Q&A, so I'm going to try to get through at least these last 3 questions here. Peter, you wanted to speak again, so please unmute yourself. Here we go.
Okay, so I'll try to be quick. When I was in 2nd grade, I went to a Catholic parochial school, and I had this experience with my 2nd grade teacher who created in me the realization that people say things sometimes and they do something else. And when you point out to them that there's this contradiction going on, they get very mad at you, and you learn to shut up and not bring that to the attention of these bosses, managers, teachers. And when I moved to San Jose in 1980, I ran into this philosophy teacher that I like to think of as Albert Einstein in a way. And he helped clarify this for me in the sense that when I talk to people about religion, I say I identify with the Holy Spirit. And for me, that's human consciousness and greater consciousness. And his point in a very detailed book was, we have this dual aspect of being an individual ego, but then we became like radio waves, consciousness is like waves, and we need to get this dynamic between the balance between experiencing both of these. A lot of people like Trump don't have much consciousness. What they have is a very strong self-centered ego. So they can't provide empathy or experience with people. Now, to my last point is to add to complexity to this is half of our consciousness is really unconsciousness. So there are things we do that we're not, our egos aren't even aware of, but other people may experience them. And so it gets into this complicated thing of, is this person being evil, or do they have very bad subconscious habits that they've developed and they're not even aware they're really doing it? And thank you.
Good point. Thank you. Thank you.
Psychological.
Let's go over to David Lindenfield. David?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on Barbara's point about inequality and equality and how that's changed over time. I just read a book recently, which I thought was really good. It was written by Robert Putnam. It just came out within the last year. It's called The Upswing. And it's a really very, very thorough social science study of all the different indices of how this has changed. And his point is that from about 1900 to 1960, a lot of those indices were moving in the direction of equality and more equitable distribution of wealth, better health outcomes, and so forth, all very, very copiously documented. And then, surprisingly perhaps, that beginning in the late 60s, a lot of those indicators started going the other way and creating a society leading to the kinds of things that you were talking about these huge disparities. So I think he's really onto something there. And he also says that this study can show us some ways in which we can go back to the way things had been before.
Yeah, he's a wonderful guy. I know him, and that was a great book. I totally agree. The only maybe you'll accept it as a friendly amendment. My reading of that book is that he wasn't only talking about economic inequality. He was talking about basically relationships. What's called civil society. He was talking about kind of thick bonds that connect us with one another, and the kind of thinning out of all those bonds. His famous previous book was called Bowling Alone.
Right,
you don't go out in a bowling league, you bowl alone. And so I think as a sociologist, he was pointing perhaps even fundamentally to the weakening of social bonds. And I think you're right that I know he certainly agrees that growing economic inequality is involved in that, but I don't think he quite reduces it all to that.
No, it's all of the above.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Let's go to our last question of the evening from Rita. Rita, please close us out on this.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, I'm sorry. My ADHD just kicked in on me. I wanted to make a comment about the civil service, or the civil service,
the national service.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yes, the registration. Something that dawned on me and that we might not think of initially is that, there are so many people that come from homes that are not homes that are able to encourage and push them toward, education because of their own, we're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs here, right? Some people are just trying to survive. Well, the thing that I think about in this is that, sometimes people need to be given jobs that will engender pride in what they're doing. And I can really see that getting this opportunity to serve our country in a way can engender that sense of, pride in themselves for contributing to their country and their society, and
Yeah.
also possibly even giving them experiences that they might not have had if they were not in that service.
It's really true. I couldn't agree more, Rita. And I think it's true across the board, and I also think that there's no such thing as a person who can't do that. For example, I love the play. You remember the old movie Boys Town with Spencer Tracy, and it's just a great movie about a home for. They even had a campaign like the worst boy in America. They find the worst boy in America, send him to Boys Town, we'll help him out. Well, I actually went to Boys Town a few years ago. Now it's called Boys and Girls Town. They have boys and girls, and these are kids who have had every possible, it's just heartbreaking, abuse, abandonment, just every bad rap you can come up with. And these kids go to this place and they just are so loved and helped and supported. And the first night I was there, this kid who had a terrible time didn't want to help clean up after dinner. And he told the counselor, well, my parent, I'm just one of my first days here. I'm really afraid. I've had 1,000 problems, and he had 1,000 problems, and I'm scared. I'm depressed. Blah blah blah. And I don't want to do this. And the counselor said, "Well, I understand how you feel, but our philosophy here is that everybody's able to help other people. Everybody, even you're able to help other people." And that kid just kind of stood up straight, and he got it. You got well, if everybody can do it, I can do it. It was just a beautiful thing. And I think it sort of makes your point, right? That giving people an opportunity to participate in something bigger than they are that helps other people. A, everybody can do that, and B, it just lifts everybody up. It lifts you up and everybody around you. So beautiful.
Thank you for bringing that up too, Rita, and thank you for again for just being one of always a good energy and always a good voice and vibe in these kinds of things. So it's always good to see you at these. David, so I think we're closing out Q&A right now. I want to just hand the floor to you for any last words or last thoughts you have on just the theme of trust, what this means for Braver Angels, anything that sticks out to you about what we've talked about tonight, and what we should all be thinking between now and the next time we see you on an America's Public Forum. So.
Well, I don't know, Luke, that sounded like pretty. Those are pretty words, but what are you really trying to do? Or what's your real agenda? I don't know if I trust this whole situation. No, I do trust it, Luke. And I feel like we've had a good discussion, and this is somebody said, I forget who said it. Somebody said, this is a multifaceted issue. So there's a lot of complexity to this, and there are a lot of pieces of it. And I would just say, let's just, as a group, as an organization, let's keep working with this, knowing that it's at the very heart of what we do. I think it's at the very heart of what we do is to help take a society where trust in each other and our institutions is possibly at an all-time low. We don't know that exactly, but it's very low. And our challenge is to create an America where most people can feel that they can trust each other and trust our systems. And so it's just that the heart and soul of our work at Braver Angels, it begins within each of us, and then kind of radiates out to how we can affect the community and ultimately the nation. So it's a great discussion. We'll keep working with it, and we'll come up with different ideas as to how we as an organization can be more effective, at this mission. I feel like it's kind of a calling really for so many of us. And so it's really great to be with you. Good to talk to you to Luke. Thanks for leading it. Ibrahim, Sasha, thanks everybody. So,
well, David, thank you for agreeing to come on this. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on this. I look forward to having some deeper thoughts as well with you and with many others in our org and many others in our friends as we push forward with this work. So if everybody can join me in giving a round of jazz hands to David Blankenhorn. David, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for all this. It's been really great. And
thanks,
we'll
everybody.
Look forward to next time you're here.
See you next time.
Meantime, if everybody can join me in giving jazz hands to Sasha and Ibrahim, my two excellent Zoom event managers tonight who have been doing everything behind the scenes here. Thank you two for this. You guys are the coolest whips in town, and you guys always just help with just making sure that everything I screw up doesn't make the whole event go
Which
down.
is a handful, I can tell you. Thank you, Sasha and Ibrahim.
So let's just a few final announcements. So Ibrahim is putting some links in the chat. One of those links is to a recent book by David Blankenhorn on the work of Braver Angels. There's a small fee to get it as on Amazon. You can also join Braver Angels as a member for $12 a year, and the book will come with your
And here's the thing, people. If you buy the book, the money goes to Braver Angels. That's good. But here's the thing. If you or somebody who isn't a member join the organization, you get the book for free and the sun shines brighter. The flowers are more colorful. God in heaven says this is a good thing. You make the world a better place. So the thing to do is join the organization, get the book for free. And if you haven't done that, if you've already done some version of that, seriously, we really need the members because we're a member-powered organization. We're a grassroots organization. Everything depends on the people in the community doing the work. So if you can get somebody that, maybe recruit a friend or somebody to join, get the book, it really, it's a good thing. I really ask you to do that.
To join Braver Angels, we have added the link to Braver Angels' website in the chat. When you go on the website, you will see a button to show you how to join. So that is there.
And look, Luke, how easy is it to do?
It is quite straightforward. It's a couple of clicks.
Very easy.
Yes.
Very
David,
easy.
it's so easy that I figured it out once upon a time. And so
that's right.
So with that, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you everybody who brought their voices in. Thank you everybody who stayed with us for 2 hours and listened, and for just being a part of this broader community and being an integral part of our work. And thank you for the support. We will do our best to continue in the work that we're in, both in terms of the person-to-person programming and the event programming like this, and many more things as we move on. It's been an honor to work with people like David and people like Sasha and Ibrahim and all of our other colleagues. And I hope sometime soon to be working with some of you as well. If you're ever interested in getting involved with us and volunteering and joining perhaps the APF team, we're always looking for more folks on that. Meantime, there's a lot more interesting APFs coming up in the next 2 months, and then I will have the schedule set up for even more through the end of the year. So be on the lookout on our newsletters for those. And in the meantime, we will look forward to seeing you on those, on future debates, on future workshops and panels, and in many more things. So thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight on this wonderful conversation. And I look forward to working with you, and the rest of my colleagues in Braver Angels look forward to working with you to build a house united as we march forward into a glorious future. So thank you, everybody, and see you sometime soon.